All right. Hello, everyone. This is Mathew Heggem, Chief Strategist for HireEffect. I'm incredibly excited to be here today with a brand new, fabulous guest, a member of my community and certainly somebody I've known for a while. And today we're going to really talk a little bit more about her journey, Shalonda Ingram, as an omnipreneur, which we'll define a little bit later, and talk about what's up in her world. So I'll do a proper introduction, Shalonda, for you, so you get to sort of bask in me telling people about how awesome you are.
I'm taking it in.
Good. So take it in, honey. So Shalonda Ingram creates scalable, symbiotic results as a social entrepreneur, which is something that we firmly believe in and support at HireEffect. She's a strategist and a grassroots organizer. She cares about the community and is the founder of multiple organizations and or the lead behind a lot of initiatives. She's the founder of Nursha Project, the co-founder of Queer Art Impact, the owner of Performa Unlimited, and serves as a strategist for gender illumination and idea connection systems. So in short, you're pretty busy, right, Shalonda?
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of awesome things. Born and raised in St. Louis, Shalonda is committed to elevating consciousness, cultivating opportunity, and empowering the collective liberation of individuals, artists, and communities. Shalonda, you are one of a few folks in my world that I would define as an omnipreneur. Now, for those of you who are tuning in and you don't know what that word means, I'll just sort of define it simply by stating that an omnipreneur is somebody that really has an impact in multiple directions. And so you look at, for example, your ecosystem, Shalonda, of businesses, they're, as much as each of these things stand alone, they're also interconnected and interwoven in sort of this beautiful tapestry of what creates the world that you envision.
Yeah.
So Shalonda, I've given my little intro to who you are. I want to pass it on to you, though, for a moment to just sort of fill in the blanks and paint the picture for those listening about what you've been up to and sort of highlight some things that are important for us to hear.
Sure. So thank you for having me, Matthew, and thank you for the long-term commitment to our kinship and business dynamics over the years. It's been phenomenal to learn and grow in your presence. And ultimately, what I'm up to is working to make a world that works for more people than less, right? It's super simple. Everything that I'm up to is about people, purpose, or paper. And by paper, that could be money, or it could also be documents or assets, or documents that change policy and so forth. So those are the guiding principles for what I'm up to and the various directions. And so Nursha has been many things. It has been a home to some artists. It's housed productions. We've been nominated for Innovative Theater Awards across the board to being involved in strategy and design for large-scale corporations and government groups, from HUD on across the line, and now some work with idea connection systems with the Department of Defense. So it's been many things, and I'm sure it'll keep transforming as the consciousness shifts in our culture. It's also been a collaborative platform for artists in Kenya, and it will be what people need it to be, essentially. Proforma is a unique platform. I've been fortunate to work with Bill Cohen to produce products so that some of the smaller companies that need that facelift and need to be able to access marketing materials or e-commerce products in a way that is scalable. So that could happen. That's really derivative of having produced events over the years and having that group of volunteers stuffing a gift bag and coming to understand that that could be more efficient and somebody's generating from that. It just wasn't us at the time. And so, right now my work is about growing myself as a person, figuring out how to stay in my spiritual practices and heal myself from a lot of different journeys along the path, and then offering that through how I show up in communities and boardrooms, etc.
That's interesting. So Showing up is a theme of my life, and I think many others as well. Sometimes it's a challenge to actually do that. And yet, in spite of that, I think one of the greatest honors that you can do for somebody is actually showing up. I know from the world of event production, it's like, honey, please just buy the ticket and be there to show your support for the community. Can you talk about, though, sort of and this might be a little bit of a digression from what we had planned to talk about today, but I'm kind of curious. Can you talk a little bit about what it means for you to be showing up in all of these different spaces? Because going from the backstage of a queer arts festival, the boardroom, or the conference room with a bunch of like military people, like those are two different worlds. What is it like for you to sort of show up in these different spaces?
It can be confronting for me and for the folks in the room. I think it's important that I do, though, and that I keep my piercings in, and that I'm fully who I am in every space that I enter. I think it's a beautiful opportunity for everyone to be pushed in different directions and have experiences that may raise their eyebrows. It also, for me, as a queer person of hue, it's really important to be in the room, right? And be a part of how some of those conversations are going down, and how to confront some of the history, particularly in the States, around whether or not people of color get to be a part of the conversation. So it has its brilliance, and it also has its confrontations. And I think that's as true for me as it may be for folks who've not ever been engaged with folks of color. I remember being on a cruise ship as a stage manager and being engaged with some folks from other parts of the world who'd not ever had a female person who wasn't their subordinate, for example. So that was important and necessary for their growth, right? And for mine. And so there are ways that it's amazing and awesome, and it's also necessary for folks to be able to transform and experience some of the things that you can only experience live and direct.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things that I know about you, Shalonda, is that you're very purpose-driven. And as you know, through our work together, and through some of the work, and through some of my work with my clients, and also through HireEffect, who's sort of the organization that has brought us onto this call together. That purpose is a very important thing. And one of the frameworks that we've collectively leveraged is a tool called Purpose Way Impact from Brand Foundations. It's a great tool and a great company founded by Steve Goodwin and JP LaCour. JP happens to be, I think, on the board, if not the president, of the New York City Conscious Capitalism chapter, which we'll talk about a little later when we talk about the panel that you'll be on in March. But can you just kind of help us to understand, or really sort of frame your work through that lens of purpose, way, and impact? Sure.
So part of these identity conversations that we have in our culture, which are all made up, by the way, has supported me in developing a purpose of transforming how people, including myself, relate to what's possible. Receiving a ton of messages around, for example, people of color are often related to as being minorities. That is completely untrue, and will likely never be true based on the truth of what that has looked like. And by naming it otherwise, it creates a lot of deficit in consciousness. You look at the news, you see folks of color being marginalized, etc. Same thing with female-bodied people. So for me, a lot of purpose comes from surviving this culture and having the capacity to meditate, and having family members of varying cultures, both chosen and blood family, and becoming responsible for whether or not I have a great life, without regard to all these perceived oppositions or hurdles that are set forth. So a lot of that has driven purpose for me. The way that I go about that varies a lot. It looks like donating time. It looks like being with young adults. It looks like making music with folks in Kenya in the slums in a studio. across the board to growing myself and meditating, practicing Vipassana, and being accountable and responsible for how I experience the world and how whether or not I'm healthy and frankly sane in this culture. And that extends to creating time and space to build community and make sure that I have what I need personally in order to conduct business in a culture like ours at a time like this. And to figure out how to forgive and be forgiven and engage in some of the more challenging aspects of community building, not just celebration. And the impact of doing that work is being able to pick up the phone and get your needs met, or to be able to connect people and say, hey, this is an amazing idea. You two organizations or people may want to support each other. And the other thing that I want to say about impact is that it can be really micro or it can be grand, right? Like it doesn't have to be a gala to be great. And I think one of the ways that I go about that is convening in small groups. I'm a part of a community in Rochester, New York that hosts a Tuesday night fireside event that's been going on for 30 years, right? And people show up to that and they get to be together and engage and talk about difficult things in a safe environment. So witnessing some of the elders and some of the practices that they have are also shaping the way that I'm going about integrating all this. I would say that as it relates specifically to brand foundations, I'm in the process of taking myself and the brands that I'm engaged with and or have developed through a process. So big shout out to them for putting this resource out and making it available for folks. It's a fantastic tool.
Yeah, totally. It's a great alternative to this sort of traditional mission, vision, values structure that we've sort of been handed over by previous generations. Now, there was something about what you said just now that reminded me of two things. One, the importance of community, right? And sort of the people that surround you. And you know, you talk about impact and impact relative to environment and ecosystem, but there's also sort of this idea of like taking care of yourself, right? Like, you know, how do you serve others if you aren't serving who you are? And you know, from interacting with you and working with you, I know that you are a very authentic human being. You talk about, like you mentioned earlier, you show up with your piercings on in that boardroom because that's who you are. You're honoring that. And, you know, we recently had a guest blogger, Lori Dixon, write an article for HireEffect's blog about living your purpose. And the title of it was Loving the Skin You're In. So can you talk a little bit just about this idea of self-care and how that translates out towards taking care of the communities that you are a part of?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's something that I've struggled with, and I know that many people struggle with. We're in a culture of competition and of external gratification, right? And so it's my experience that folks must work at that. I had the good fortune of having a client who exposed me to what it took to become someone who worked well with her. Her name is Shakti Butler. She created the company World Trust Educational Services, and she's a phenomenal human being. And one of her requests and requirements of me, I was in my early 20s at the time, she was like, you must go to the Siddha Yoga meditation before, as a part of your interview process. And I was like, excuse me? Right? And I didn't get it at all until I took the course, and she was actually one of the facilitators for it, and it changed my life. Going to the ashram with regularity and really getting that the work that she was doing required a level of grounding and required a practice of spirit, etc. And so that process as an entrepreneur, as a young entrepreneur at the time, really supported me with comprehending that these things don't just happen. Like nobody can go to the mat for you. Nobody can go to a yoga class for you. And those muscles get built or they don't. And that largely impacts what it is to engage with folks. I've certainly been not great at different aspects and points in my life too. And so I know what it is to to do the work, and I know what it looks like when I'm not doing the work. And
Mm.
the power of knowing that has led to a choice that is, I'm far better when I'm doing what I must do to be well, and then I can be of service and not depleting the communities that I'm a part of, or creating scenarios that take more time and energy because the people at the table aren't well. And so I think it's individual responsibility that impacts communities. And we're certainly witnessing that in our culture on a global scale right now, politically and otherwise, where people aren't necessarily getting things done, and they're obviously not well, right? So I think we see it micro and macro, and we all individually have a responsibility to sort ourselves out and show up and grow in each other's presence. And it's not always cute, and it is absolutely humbling and necessary for us to create the kind of culture and communities that we want to experience.
Word. Now, I know that just from talking to you that, you are very tuned into the world around you, and you're also very tuned into the people that have kind of gotten you to where you are. I know you mentioned having a mentor. Can you tell me just a little bit about this mentor and
Sure.
maybe any other people in your life that serve as that role of a mentor as you've gone down this entrepreneurial path?
Sure. Well, one of them I mentioned earlier, Dr. Shakti Butler. She's phenomenal, and we haven't had very much direct communication of late. And the work that we did together and the ways that I witness her work now in the world is phenomenal. And I know that at all times she's literally a phone call away, and that's a really powerful experience to have. And I also had a mentor, Risa Jenkins. She recently passed, and she was deeply, deeply transformational to me as a pillar in my growth as an entrepreneur. And so she had the good fortune of being a VP, and also one of the first Black people and Black women to be a VP at UPS, and developed hundreds of companies inside of that company. And so she taught me a lot about how to be in the room, and that it was okay that I was in the room, and how to really embrace my brilliance and be responsible for getting things done, and understanding the urgency of being of service. And so we had the fortune of working on things like Wordle, and she had a fellowship at the D School at Stanford, and Nursha was a part of that study inside of her project called Fundraise Ballista. So a lot of times you'll see Nursha sponsored by Fundraise Ballista, and I have the fortune of having a cohort with her. You'll see some of their work coming forth in partnership with Nursha down the line. They're doing some really unique work around innovating in communities that don't tend to be looked at as innovators, whether that's business schools and community leaders, etc. And Risa was phenomenal in all of our lives, and I will actually have the good fortune of connecting with some of her friends and colleagues next week while I'm in the Bay for some activities there. And that right now, a part of what I'm up to is really living into a lot of what I learned with her. I had the experience of, she had a sudden health challenge and she couldn't outlive it, and so that really impacted me, and I'm doing what I have to do to heal up and continue to bring light to her legacy. Yeah.
Word. That's awesome. Thank you for doing that work, because not a lot of people make the commitment to fulfilling purpose and carrying out legacy. So let's actually talk. I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit about sort of the plans ahead, at least this upcoming trip, and so I'm sort of curious, really, what's in the future for Shalonda Ingram? What are you working on right now, and how do you see things sort of unfolding over the next few stages of your evolution?
Yeah. Well, right now I'm involved with the amazing company called Idea Connection Systems, and there's a lot of instruments that live inside of that company, a lot of consultants, and I'm actually learning a lot about how to engage with organizations who are utilizing their tools and how to onboard those tools as ways to support folks with understanding their preferences, understanding difference, and moving some of that energy out of the way so that innovation can emerge. And by that, that can look like leveraging existing resources. It's all about creating new, whether that's something brand new across the board, to taking the talent that is there and discerning how to make sure that the right folks are in the right spaces and people are being able to be themselves and thrive as who they are, not taking on a task or a role that ultimately they're not prepared to take, given the means to an end sort of culture that we live in. So we understand that we live in a corporation and there's a responsibility to paying bills and taking on a task that you can sell your time for and live with, right? But how do we support people with doing that in ways that are sustainable and making sure that there's some human element that is being considered in all those things, not just our documents about task that really don't take into account who the people are and who's going to love doing this thing, right? Because the more that we're doing that, the better off we are as a culture. And one of the unique experiences I had loading out an event in DC, late night, we're taking all the gear out of this elevator and we hear this voice singing in the lobby. And it was an amazing voice. And I'm like, who is singing? Like, we unplugged all the gear that was on a different floor, right? The woman who's like at the security desk is a songbird, like a beautiful voice. Healing voice. And I could only hope that she was there knowing that the acoustics were great while she's guarding an empty building, right? It's like, that's the kind of culture that we live in. So at ICS, I hope to support people with getting access to tools like the ISPI so that they can engage and understand, okay, these are my quirks or my challenges or difficulties. So I'm not going to make myself subject to a task or a role that ultimately is not working for myself or for the opportunity that I'm in. So that's going on at ICS. Also, some folks may have experienced Born Brown back in the day. We're revitalizing and re-energizing that platform and making sure that there's some e-commerce opportunity for us to build programs from to support people of the global majority with understanding their universal and human rights. And I'm not entirely sure how deep that's going to get, but I know that it will inevitably include the elements of hip hop, fashion, and people having connections and conversations that will support them in understanding that there's really no deficit in any human being. It's just a matter of being able to see each other as clearly as possible.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So clearly we've only just sort of scratched the surface of like who you are and what you're about, and certainly what you're about to sort of launch in the world as the next stage. But I do want to just let everyone know on the line that Shalonda is actually going to be on a panel here in DC on Wednesday, March 13th. Shalonda is joining 4 other purpose-driven business leaders, including Reverend Richard Toffel and George Economy from the nation's first spiritual incubator, the Swedenborg Center, as well as my fellow co-organizer for Conscious Capitalism, DC, Aparna Sane. So, you know, we'll leave more information about that in the comment section. If you're curious, you can RSVP via the meetup group. But you know, so you know, I think we'll have a chance to hear more about your story and what you know, what advice you have, really, ultimately for purpose-driven entrepreneurs. But I want to sort of conclude this conversation with a little bit of advice, maybe 1 or 2 things that you sort of want to share or give back to the community, pieces of wisdom that you've gained in your journey that you think help that next entrepreneur sort of break through those tough moments that sometimes arrive in our lives.
I think it's all about compassion with yourself and the people around you. Take the losses with as much grace as possible. Thank the people who fire you and learn why they did that. Figure out how you can heal yourself and become a more accountable and responsible human being, and not to get confused by capitalism as a societal norm that we live in, right? Like we live in the corporation of the United States of America. We live inside of a business, right? And it's really important to remember that a social number and an EIN are the same length, right? And that some of what we get caught up with here is confusing our individual selves with the norms that have been set up, which we're actually working to transform. So I think just do your work, whatever that is, like face it, whether it's old childhood stuff or recent adulthood stuff. Deal with your ish and get yourself sorted so that you can be of service.
Word.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I would add is like get mentors, right? And figure out, or community groups, or participate in things, show up to talks or online gatherings, etc., so that you can be in a state of perpetual growth and development. And there are tons of organizations that provide that. Like Move the Crowd's a great organization for entrepreneurship. Tons of folks operating out of cohorts in that. Same, Conscious Capitalism. Connect up with folks so that you're not doing the work in isolation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it can get pretty lonely out there.
Oh, yeah.
On so many levels. But, as long as you have that support structure, and just also stay open to the fact that sometimes support is there even when you don't see it. You know, it's and people have done the work before us, and unfortunately some people have passed before they've lived out their full legacy. And so just keep your eyes open and look back, look forward, look to the left, look to the right, and keep going. So thank you for that sort of those words of wisdom, and for sharing your story. So again, Shalonda Ingram, you can find out more about her in the description, and in the links below we'll provide some content. Please try to show up on March 13th to join us for the panel if you're in the DC area. If you're not, again, try to connect with us online, become a part of the community, and of course, visit us online, HireEffect.com. On a personal note, I'm just honored to be working for a company that actually practices conscious capitalism at its core. And you, Shalonda, have had interactions with the CEO. Jennifer is an amazing woman.
Oh, yeah.
She's very inspiring, and we're all honored to sort of be a part of the community that she's building, called HireEffect. So, Shalonda, thank you very much for being a part of today's call, okay?
Yep. Thanks,
all right.
Maddie. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.